What's up, guys? This is Corey Baker from Baker Forge and Tool. In my business, we do tons of heavy grinding every single day, and we needed a grinder that could take abuse and keep on trucking without slowing down billet production. The Ameribraid variable speed 2x72 is just that. All heavy-duty parts and framing with well-thought-out accessories that are easy to use and not bogged down with lots of tiny parts. By far, the best accessory item that Ameribraid sells is their surface grinding attachment. It is absolutely foolproof and the best in the industry. With quick-release magnet system, there is no prying your workpiece off the platen. Very fast to slap a billet or a knife onto the table, engage magnets, and start surfacing with precise increments. On top of all of this, their customer support is outstanding. Eric and Kevin are always available and fast to help with any situation. If you're in the market for a top-of-the-line grinder, or maybe just an accessory to add to your existing setup, go to ameribraid.com and use the code HUSTLE100 for $100 off any grinder package. All right, next up, the Hustle and Grind Podcast.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Hustle and Grind Podcast. I'm Noah Bloomberg from Entiat River Forge here with Ryan Coakley from Ryan Chadbourne Knife Works.
Hello.
Our special guest today is Tobais Hangler. How are you today, sir?
Thank you for having me.
Welcome. So just quickly, let's go ahead and introduce yourself to our listeners, because some of them might not be familiar with you. Where are you from, and what exactly do you do, sir?
My name is Tobais Hangler. I am a trained metallurgist and these days full-time bladesmith. So I've studied metallurgy at university, afterwards worked for a bit, and slowly transitioned into full-time knife making. And I focus on culinary knife making, heat treating, metallurgy, all the fine geometry, high hardness stuff, basically now, and just love forging and love the crafts as a basis for all of it.
Awesome. There was one question I wanted to get out of the way right off the bat. A lot of us, including myself, use AEBL stainless. How familiar are you with AEBL? And if you're very familiar, the question that I hear a lot and I've had myself is, how critical is the cryo step? And does using a household freezer versus dry ice, slurry, or liquid nitrogen make a huge difference?
Actually, it's a pretty good and interesting question. I personally use 14C28N a lot more, which is very, very similar to AEBL. It just has a bit more nitrogen, basically. So it's basically the difference is mostly towards a little bit higher corrosion resistance. Other than that, it is very similar. I mean, Laren Thomas, for example, has done a bunch of testing on it. And both of these deals basically benefit equally from cryo, I would say. It's very similar. If you get the knife right after the heat treatment, so right after your quench, you bring it down to room temperature and put it into the household freezer right away, like within 5 minutes, then there's not too much difference to using, for example, CO2 or even liquid nitrogen. So the benefit of using liquid nitrogen with this steel is that even if you quench it and you go into the cryo 2 or 3 hours later or 5 hours later, you will get the same result. But if you are very quick after the heat treat, after the quench, you go right into the cryo and the retained austenite hasn't had time to stabilize itself yet, it will basically transform pretty well too. There is a pretty good diagram out there. Obviously, I don't have it at my fingertips, but I have it in the back of my mind, and that is basically just a statement that the performance difference is very small if you go into your minus 20 degrees Celsius freezer right after the quench.
Okay. I think that gives a lot of makers out there peace of mind too, because I know a lot of guys, liquid nitrogen Dewar, and to keep it filled is pretty pricey. Yeah, it's especially for the hobbyist.
Yeah, if you're a hobbyist or like doing batches, or if you're doing batches, it's probably a lot better. But for me, it's also a cost, a couple €100 each time to fill the dewar and go to the store. And in summer, maybe you have 1.5, 2 months until it's all evaporated. So yeah, it adds up. It adds up.
Yeah,
Well, and I think it just
that's
depends
awesome.
on the, like you're saying, for the hobbyist versus somebody that's doing it full time. If you've got, that's going to kind of keep the pressure on you to make sure that you're producing what you need to produce, to make use of that liquid nitrogen before it evaporates.
Yeah, I mean it's by far not the worst thing in the world. If you do like 20 knives, it's all paid for. I mean, then it's in the 2-3 euros per knife region, and you get a couple of more percent out of your steel, and it's all good. I mean, at the end of the day, we all sell knives that cost a good amount of money compared to the factory knives, so we want to get everything out of them that we can, and just push the performance as much as you can. And I think having liquid nitrogen as a professional maker is a very low cost at the end of the day. But for the hobbyists, there's not going to be too much difference with AEBL if you go into the freezer right afterwards. So no tempering before. If you do quench, temper, and then you go into the household freezer, there's no point in that. But just right after the quench, bring it down to room temperature pretty quickly and go into the freezer. Then you'll get like 95% of what you would have with cryo.
Awesome.
That's really good info. I had no idea that the time frame was such a factor. So that's really cool to know.
I mean, I studied 7 years of metallurgy without knowing that. It's just one study that I read that I stumbled across that showed that pretty well. So it's not cryo is still not too well understood. So there's a lot of funny things going on. Some people claim, for example, that the heating rate after the cryo is important. Others say that the holding time is important. So there's still some contradicting data out there, but getting it to a defined low temperature definitely helps, and that's also what I do with all my like if I use 52-100 or any steel in that category, I just always go into the household freezer because it's no risk, it's no cost. I have it at the shop anyways, and it's just a defined end temperature for my heat treatment. So in the summer it could be 30 degrees Celsius. Sorry for the Fahrenheit guys, I have no idea, but you can imagine summer temperatures, winter temperatures. There's going to be
Sure.
a bunch of difference.
Yeah.
So and there's actually like 40, 50 degrees Celsius in extremes, and that can impact your heat treatment outcome, even if it's just slightly. But it bugs me that it's possible that just the surrounding temperature would have an influence. So I just decided for myself like 5-6 years ago, whatever I do after the quench, it just goes into the freezer because it doesn't do no harm, and it's always the same end temperature then. If it's not cryo anyways, if it's not going into the liquid nitrogen, and even then I just put it into the household freezer first, because it reduces the thermal stress on it. Like afterwards, I put it into the liquid nitrogen, but it's already at a lower starting temperature.
So
So
are you saying you freeze all your steels?
Yes, household freezer, all my steels. Because even if you do 52-100, it depends on the retained austenite content. Um, so that's like the soft phase that you have in the steel. That's the reason why you do cryo. Basically, you have some steel that doesn't transform into martensite. That is called retained austenite, because in the austenization step, you get carbon into solution. You have your austenite, and then you quench it, and basically we always assume that it turns into martensite, but there's like a remaining percentage in any steel that will be retained austenite. So even on a low alloy, low anything steel, like a, I don't know, C75 or something, you will have a small percentage of retained austenite. And if you go lower on temperature, it will always transform better. So that's why I do it on all my steels, even though it's like not defined in any data sheets. But it's just something like a good practice for me, to always have the same end temperature, and I have friends who work in research departments, and he said that in larger heat treatment facilities, this is a common mistake, that they quench a big machine part and they want to move on. They want to move on with the day, and these parts can take the good amount of time to cool down. So they will just start the tempering process while the piece is still at like 50, 60, 70 degrees Celsius, and that has an impact. And then they have increased retained austenite contents. In the long run, the parts don't hold up to the expected lifetime that they should. So there's definitely that. Like, don't temper if you're still too warm. That would be important. Or if you use a warm quenching oil, if you heat your quenching oil to, I don't know, 70 degrees Celsius or something. So also don't go directly into the temper afterwards. Always cool it down at least to room temperature. Just, give it 10 seconds under the running water. At least then you are at room temperature. It's just something to keep in mind.
So you're talking about directly after the quench. So let's say you've got something like 52100 or some other carbon steel that you're quenching in oil. You'll then, after it's quenched in oil, do you go directly into the freezer after the quench, or do you let it sit and get to room temperature and then go into the freezer, or how are you doing that?
Actually, like, my procedure is after the austenization, I quench in hot oil at 140 degrees for 52100. So that is. Are you starting to convert? That would be
I
good,
am, yes.
probably. I think most of your listeners are more used to Fahrenheit, and I'm not.
Yeah. So you're quenching in oil that's 140 degrees
Celsius, yeah.
Okay, so that's 284 degrees Fahrenheit.
Right. And then I go into the quench plates. So I have a set of dies for my press that I put the knives in after that. So I quench it down underneath the martensitic transition area. So the martensite formation has already begun. And then I go out of the hot oil into quench plates, which then are not really quench plates because they don't do the quenching, but they will ensure that my knives stay flat. And
Gotcha.
that works fantastically, really. Like,
Yeah,
having
no,
hot oil.
I do the same
and then
thing after I quench something in oil. I don't quench it in quite that hot of an oil, but I am doing like an oil quench, throw it right into some aluminum plates just to make sure that I don't have any warpage or anything like that. And
Yep.
I know that that's drawing out some more heat. Is that also converting at the same time still?
Yes. Basically, even just cooling it down in the air will form the martensite at that point. The whole idea of quenching it in a hot oil and then giving it a little bit more time is to reduce the warping. So you have to quench down to 160 or so pretty quickly, otherwise you don't get the full hardness. On the other, in that scenario, you would not get the full hardness. You wouldn't have martensite all the way. But then afterwards, you actually have a bit of time. Like, there is a minute or two of time where that you can play around with straightening the blade.
Right.
And we talked about the retained austenite. So when the austenite forms martensite, it actually increases in size. So it has a small % of increase in size. So what happens if you have a knife that is just transforming and it has a slight bend? As you straighten the bend, the retained austenite is now favored to transition into martensite because it's under stress. So it's like tensioning. And it wants to have more room. So basically, there is a push towards transforming into martensite because the martensite is the bigger phase and there's more room now, kind of, in a simplistic way. So
I appreciate the simplistic description there.
I try.
We're
it's a fine
simple
line.
bladesmiths here. Yeah.
Yeah. Just stop me if I get drawn off in one direction. Either one of those. If it's too stupid or if it's too technical.
This is all fantastic information. I maybe once or twice in the entire time I've been making knives had seen somebody freeze or cryo a carbon steel, and I believe it was Onar Kagler. I think he did it in one of his Dies in Every Film videos. And I was confused by it because I had never seen anyone do it. I don't know of anybody who does that.
I'm not
And
saying that it will increase the performance of the blade by so much. It's probably not going to even be measurable in winter times or like in a good day. But for me, it's just peace of mind that on a hot day, I still have the same end temperature, and it's always the same. You know, we have a long process chain of uh, doing what we do, and each step will influence the next step. So if we normalize, maybe the temperature is off a little bit, and then you anneal, and then the annealing rate is off by a little bit. You know, all these changes, they accumulate, and then you say, yeah, well, I austenize the steel the same as I do always, but maybe the starting product that you had a completely different structure by then already. So these process variations of plus minus 1 or 2 HRC that we are used to, that is partly the steel, and that is partly just how we fuck up the process in every stage.
yeah,
So you
I,
can
I
you can do better. You can get it narrower.
I
It's
really
possible.
like it. I feel like that's a good practice to just get into your routine,
Yeah.
even just in case, you know.
Just in case, that's it. Yeah, and that way you just eliminate the small problems. Just like you, if you do a scientific test, you want to rule out as many factors as possible. You like the first point is maybe you don't assume that temperature has an effect when you weigh a piece of steel, but just to be safe, let's always measure it at the same temperature, so we always have the same results. And it's just a good practice to eliminate as many variables as possible, I think.
I love
Yeah,
that, man. That's
no,
great.
I
So
agree.
before we get off the topic of cryo, let's do one more. I've seen a couple makers who will cryo treat uh, in between temper cycles. Are you familiar with that practice?
Yep.
So
um,
what's the purpose of that? And I've seen it specifically with carbon steels. So
with
what's that
carbon
about?
steels, interesting. um, well, the okay. I'm just trying to find the right part where I start with the explanation. It's retained austenite. So we have the quenched structure, and now let's say we have a big chunk of retained austenite because we have more carbon in solution for whatever reason, or we have more alloying elements. Like some alloying elements will favor the formation of retained austenite. So retained austenite, again, it's the soft phase. We don't want it in knife making. In some other parts of the industries, it's actually favorable because it's more ductile. In knife making, we don't want it. To simplify it, we don't want to have any retained austenite. So we want to have 100% austenite. Let's say I quench the steel, it has 20% retained austenite, just any number now. Now I do cryo. I can reduce the retained austenite by a lot. Let's say that we reduce it by, I don't know, 14% more. So now we have 6% of retained austenite. And now I do the first tempering cycle. Um, and during the tempering cycle, the retained austenite basically has too much carbon in it to form martensite, in a way. So it's overly saturated with carbon, and it cannot like form martensite for that reason at this temperature. So as you temper it, some of the carbon has the chance to migrate out of the austenite into carbides. So it goes out of the retained austenite, and it forms small carbides either in the austenite or on the boundary um, of the crystallites. So then, as you cool it back down to room temperature or even below that, now the austenite, the retained austenite, has a better chance of actually forming martensite because it has lost some of that carbon. So is that in any way understandable, or should I try again?
Yeah, absolutely.
I
No,
follow
no.
you for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. So we have
Yeah.
too much carbon in solution. We drop the temperature in the first cryo. Most of the stuff is going to transform, but not all of it. Some is just like too much carbon in there, not enough space, it's crammed in there. And now we temper it, and the higher we temper, the more carbon can actually go out of the austenite. And then the austenite is kind of relieved in a way, and it can transform a bit more easy because there's less carbon atoms stuck in the grit that would make the transformation a bit harder. I think that's a good way of thinking of it. And if you do 3 cycles tempering and cryo, then you just want to. That's just pure perfectionism. You just want to get like as little as possible. The liquid nitrogen bottle is already there, so why not stick the knife in there just a couple more times to get it as good as you can.
Interesting. So that's actually if I'm understanding this correctly, that's actually the reason for doing multiple temper cycles in the first place. Is when you're pulling it out and cooling it down, it's allowing that martensite, or sorry, the austenite that's been relieved by the first temper cycle to help transfer into more martensite, and then you go back into the temper after that's happened.
Exactly.
Okay.
So that is part of the reason, and the other, and a subsequent reason that comes from that is, now imagine we have the 5-6% of retained austenite that didn't transform the first time, but they did transform after the first tempering cycle. So they didn't transform after the quench, but afterwards. You did the tempering, go back down, do the second cryo, and now you have basically fresh martensite. And these, however many percent of fresh martensite, have never been tempered. So they basically weren't part of the first temper, because at the first temper they were austenite.
Right.
So you have untempered martensite in there that is brittle as glass, and that's why you do the second or even the third tempering cycle. It basically all comes down to how many alloying elements you have and how much concern you have of retained austenite. So like the first cycle, reduce pretty much most of it. Second cycle, reduce pretty much all of it, and then you have still a small percentage of fresh martensite that you still want to temper in the third run.
This is so cool. I love this information. This is so cool. All right, Ryan, let's while we're at kind of a stopping point, let's throw in an ad for one of our sponsors here, and then we can get back into it.
All right. Shout out to Maritime Knife Supply.
Hustle and Grind is sponsored by Maritime Knife Supply. Whether you're looking for steel, abrasives, handle material, forges, epoxy, or anything for making in general, Maritime Knife Supply has you covered. And in the US or Canada, they ship faster than the great Cobra chicken goosesses that their country is known for. Go to Maritime Knife Supply, and when you buy a 10-pack of belts, get 10% off. And tell them we sent you, eh?
There you go, Maritime Knife Supply. And if you're looking for any of these steels that we're talking about, Lawrence probably carries them. So go check him out. Maritime Knife Supply. That man
if he
has
doesn't,
everything.
he'll source it for you.
For real, yeah. I've been doing some hidden tangs this week, and I've been using those files that I got from Lawrence, and they are phenomenal. Don't buy cheap files from the hardware store. Get some good stuff from Lawrence.
He had a shitload of 1095 drop ship to me.
Yeah, I saw those giant sheets. Jiminy Christmas, dude.
Yeah.
What size were those sheets?
2 foot by 4 foot. It's half of a 4 foot by 8 foot sheet.
How much does each of those weigh?
Oh, I don't know, 30, 40 pounds.
Dang. Yep, you've been busy. All right,
Yeah.
so we've gotten into some nitty gritty. Let's go ahead and go with something a little bit lighter. Just this morning, Tobias, I saw you had a post about some classes that you did. And
yeah, that's right.
There was some beautiful knives in there, and I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk about this little tool that you had for pushing the blades into the grinder while you were grinding bevels.
You did pay close attention to the video.
So,
awesome.
So for the listeners, it's going to be tough to describe this. So you're going to have to go to his page on Instagram, and you're going to have to see what I'm talking about here. But essentially, he has a work rest with rods on it that are vertical rods, and this little tool that looks like it has like a skateboard bearing on the end of it with a lever, so that you can basically use that mechanical pressure to push the blade into the platen, and then that skateboard bearing, or whatever the bearing is, that roller rolls along the blade and provides even pressure as you're drawing the bevel across your platen. I want to know, where did that come from?
Yeah, it's actually been a development ongoing for the last years. First of all, I want to give credits to Benjamin Kamen, who kind of pushed me in the right direction. He's Kamen_knives at Instagram. He makes phenomenal kitchen knives, and he's also putting a lot of effort into process reliability and process repeatability, basically. So as you make more knives, you don't want to fuck up as many. It's nice if they
Right.
turn out good, so you kind of want to get used to that. So after a while, for me, freehand grinding, I freehand ground all my knives for 8 or 9 years, I think. No work rests, just like hands and go onto the platen. After a while, I had trouble with my fingers and my neck most of all. So if you grind 10 knives in a row and you just stand there and you support the knife just by your fingers, it gets tedious.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And so just started the development. Benjamin Kamen had a great system that worked for him, and that was basically the first mechanical idea that got me thinking in the right direction. And that was very simple. You just have one rail, or like imagine your table rest, and then there's just a couple of millimeters of a sheet metal coming up right before the belt. So it's just like a small end stop, basically, like an L bracket, just very tiny. And now if you have your knife, you push it with the spine against this L bracket, and then you rotate it into the belt. As long as the blade height is always the same, your angle is always going to be the same, depending on the distance from the L bracket to the belt. And that is actually very little. Like if you do almost, like by definition, if you do a full grind, a full flat grind, the distance is 0. So you cannot have a sheet metal in between. But anything else than that, you just have like 1 or 2 millimeters of sheet metal right in front of your belt, and that will give you a consistent angle on both sides. And as you have this end stop, that will allow you to put a lot more pressure during grinding, especially during pre-grinding before heat treatment, because now there's nothing holding you back. It's not your finger strength or dexterity that you have to keep the angle consistent and lean on that. You can basically go pretty much everything your belt grinder has to offer. And as I was grinding more and more with this jig for about 1.5 years, I actually I was grinding a huge Apex Ultra cleaver for a client in Australia, and that was the moment where I was like, I just, you keep pushing with your thumb, and I was feeling stupid because I could not apply the pressure needed for the progress that felt right. It's just there was too much material and too little strength in my thumb left. So I was like, okay, I need a lever, and I was always bothered by basically the friction of the fingers. I was like, okay, let's make a stick and put a roller bearing on the front of that. And I just basically created something very ugly but functional. And as it happens to be, Tobin Machines, who makes fantastic grinders that I use in my workshop, he went to the same university as I did. And when I bought my grinder, he was looking for a workshop, so it happened that we ended up in the same space. So he basically has a corner of my workshop. So we have a very close iteration of ideas. If I have an idea, he usually picks it up, sees if it's something useful or not, and if it proves worthy of making this into a serious prototype. and developing an actual product out of it, he will do that, and then will offer it to the rest of the world too. So the thing that you saw is like the second generation of what he developed of how I basically developed my thing and worked. And yeah, it has a couple of tweaks in there now from different sources. I think it's way more adjustable than what I did. You can also adjust the angles, and you can use it on the contact wheel as well for S grinds, which is
Really?
fantastic. Yes. Then
Oh,
you flip the blade, so now the reference surface is not the spine of the blade, but the edge of the blade. If you want that, I want that. I want to have the S grind very close to the edge, and I want to have it parallel to the edge. So I'll just flip the blade down, and now again resting against the L bracket and leaning it into the contact wheel. And then I always have the same height, I always have the same angle, and I can apply a fair amount of pressure and do S grinds like that. And as I teach a lot of classes, I see that this works like super beginner friendly. It's still not easy, but it's a lot easier than anything else. If you start freehanding stuff, that would not be possible in a bladesmithing class if you have people who have never done that before.
Keep me
well,
posted on when those are for sale, because that's like the next evolution of how I grind. Because I grind off a work rest, I
Yep.
wrap my thumbs, or I use a push stick.
Yep.
So that
Yeah,
would be perfect.
I think they are going up for sale. Actually, UK Blade Show, the YouTube channel, Vince has visited me a couple of weeks ago, and we did 3 days of video shooting, and he hasn't released it yet because he hadn't had the time to edit it, but I did like a detailed video on how to use this thing basically and what it is. So I'm sure he's going to release in the next 2 or 3 weeks. He just released 1 or 2 days ago the second part of the induction forging video. If anybody's interested in induction forging, I just wanted to show that it's possible to make knives just using induction. So yeah, go to
So
UK Blade Show and watch the video.
I'm super interested in induction heaters just because I like machinery and equipment and how things
Yeah,
work, and that's just seems like magic to me.
it is. It still is. Like you just flick the switch, and 5 to 12 seconds later, you have red hot steel in your hands, and it just changes the way you work and changes the way you think. Because the gas forge is, you think about that very well if you want to heat it up, because it's going to take 10 minutes until you have a heatable, usable heat in it. And the induction forge is just completely different. I got a bend. If it's before heat treatment, no worries. I go out to the induction heater, heat it up, and 3 minutes later, I'm back on the grinder.
that's beautiful. But
You
yeah,
think it'll ever get to a point where people are making Damascus and induction forges?
In the video, I do a Gomai billet, so it's like a 5-layer. Damascus is a bit tricky. You need pretty beefy. I mean, you can do smaller billets. You can do like 10, 12 layers at a time. But most of the serious makers who want to make and produce more Damascus, the billets just get bigger, because basically the bigger the billet, the better your yield is going to be, the less waste you're going to have, and the faster you're going to be per kilogram. So my billets at the moment have around 8 to 10 kilograms usually, so about a little bit
20.
below 20 pounds.
Yeah.
So you would need a pretty big induction heater for that, but it's not a problem with a small forge.
We use them in the mechanic world. Noah and I are both mechanics
Yep.
For heating up like exhaust flange bolts and stuff that's really, really rotten.
Yeah, you probably got the portable units with the magic wand. Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, and those
Stick it
were the
over the head
only
of the bolt.
yeah, those were the only units that were available like a couple of years ago. But it becomes more accessible, and yeah, I think it's a cool technology. Even like when I was a student, I was looking for a workshop that had, all the proper ventilation for a coal forge and all that. And all that's not needed anymore. Then you can work in a basement. You can make fantastic knives with a belt grinder, an induction heater, and a rolling mill. And you can make pattern welded steel, and you don't have any noise and you don't have any fumes anymore. It's just, it's a tool in the box. It's not the right for everyone, but it's going to be interesting for many people who live in the city, or and who still want to make it happen, and who can't run a coal forge because the government won't allow you to do that, and the neighbors won't be happy. So I think it's very cool technology, and depending on where your energy source, where the electricity comes from in your country, it can actually be pretty green too. Like in Austria, we have a lot of water energy, so it's like 85% is renewable energy. So it's definitely better than burning gas or burning oil.
Yeah, that's interesting you bring that up. Noah and I were talking about the difference in our energy bills before you hopped on.
Oh,
Because
really?
he lives in a hydro energy area.
Yeah.
Where I live in Maine, we produce power and export it to Massachusetts and Boston,
Mm-hmm.
and then import it down from Canada, and it's super expensive.
Yeah, I am very lucky to live in an area that is almost 100% hydroelectric. We've got so many dams around us. There's one 10 miles down the road from me.
Yeah.
I live right on the Columbia River, which is a pretty large river in comparison to a lot of them. And there's multiple dams along it. And I mean, our area is well known for having less expensive power, and it's
And it hasn't
fairly
changed for
green.
you. Like it hasn't gone up.
No,
Because in Austria, it's the same thing. We have, like I said, 85% or so water energy, but the energy price is always based off the most expensive resource at the moment. So we just had a 290% increase to 390% of the electric cost compared
oh
to
my
the year
gosh,
before. So it's like before you paid 100 euros and now you pay 390. It's like,
oh my
what the hell?
gosh.
Damn, I thought our increase was bad. They hit us with 80% increase earlier this year, and they're pushing for another 40% on top of that right now.
It's absurd.
So how are your? I don't want to get political here, but are any of your energy increases due to some of the stuff that's happening over there in Eastern Europe?
Yeah, definitely. I think part of it was, just a scarcity of resources, and a lot of the power supplies, especially the plants in Germany, run, or probably most of Europe, run off coal and gas, and a lot of the gas came from the Ukraine and from Russia, and both are not as available anymore now, obviously. So the energy mix just has been hit very hard, and basically the plant making water energy just demands higher prices now because it's a free market situation, and they can, even though the cost of making the electricity hasn't gone up. It has been stabilizing again in the B2B market, as I hear, but as a private individual or as a small company, you you haven't been put down again. So I don't know if and when that's gonna happen.
Gotcha. So unfortunately, that just means that the cost of your products are going to have to go up because the cost of making them goes up, and so it all just rolls downhill.
Yep,
I
that's how it
had
is.
heard that they just pulled off a successful nuclear fusion. So
Oh,
hopefully by
really?
the time, we're old men, energy will be free.
There's all kinds of exciting stuff happening in the world of energy. There's a Israeli company, I believe, that has developed a single piston engine that produces electricity, and it runs off of standard fuels, um, standard readily available fuels, and you can put it in a vehicle or something like that, and it's literally just a generator, but because
Hmm.
it's a single piston and it has no other moving parts. There's no moving valves or anything. Um, it's extremely efficient, and it can produce electrical powered cars, but the electricity is produced on board, so you're not required to charge them, and it's
Yep.
far more fuel efficient than say a Chevy Volt, which is essentially it's a regular 4-cylinder engine
Yep.
that produces electricity that then stores and powers the wheels. So there's
Interesting.
that, and there's synthetic fuels that people are developing. Synthetic fuels that are essentially carbon neutral once the equipment is created to make them. There's a company up in Canada doing that, and I know there's a European company in conjunction with Volkswagen that's creating that. So there's a lot of really cool technological stuff that's happening with that nowadays.
Yeah, definitely. The real question is always, where's the energy really coming from? Like, where is it generated? Because even gasoline is it's basically already the battery. It's already the energy stored in a media. It's not where the energy comes from, but it was like originally solar energy before it became oil. So that is I don't remember who it was, but some guy said the interesting thing about the conventional engine is not the motor, it's the tank. It's like the fuel tank, because you just load it up in 2 minutes and you can go 800 kilometers. And it's not a problem with range, and that's what we see in the electric cars. It's one of the biggest drawbacks is just the range and how limited you are if your battery dies and if your battery goes out. So then you have to wait for 40 minutes until it's charged up and ready to go again.
Yeah, EVs take a pounding here because it gets cold. The batteries do not like being frozen.
There are definite drawbacks, but I mean, you got to think about and this is coming from a mechanic who works on diesel cars or gasoline and mostly, but if you're in a situation like for myself, for instance, I drive 20 minutes to work and 20 minutes back. On a standard EV charge, I could drive to work and back for a week and then charge it up on the weekends, and I wouldn't have any issues there.
No, and that's a perfect distance. I mean, if you do mostly short distances, electric cars really pay off. And like right now in Austria, if you go to the gas station, even for a small car like mine, it's like 60, 70 euros. So it hurts. And there's still some free electric charging stations where you can, if you had an electric car, you can just go there, plug it in, and have a free charge. And it's definitely, the driving is a lot cheaper. I think the only drawback is
70
the range.
euros. That's what, 140 bucks?
No, I think it's still the same.
Okay.
I think it's a pretty 1-to-1 ratio at the moment. I'm not following, but approximately 1-to-1.
Yeah, we complain about our gas prices over here a lot, and we shouldn't complain because even Canada is way more expensive than we are. Gas right now here is $3.19 a gallon, so 4 liters.
Yeah, still a lot cheaper than here. We pay €1.60 per liter, so probably like 50% more.
Oh yeah, probably about that.
So, how'd you get into metallurgy and knife making, and like what leads somebody to the path of being a metallurgist?
I was in business school before, so when I was 16, 14, 15, 16, I was basically aimed in a completely different direction. But it started to interest me. I was just intrigued by fire and forging, and I don't know where it came from. I had no. It was intrinsic motivation. I had no idea where it came from, really. I just felt like I wanted to have a fire and beat steel, so I did what any reasonable person would do and get a blowtorch and just start hammering anything. And then, just starting with a file and device, upgrading a coal forge and a railroad track, and just kind of snowballed into the whole thing of forging tools at first, and forging very crappy knives a little bit afterward that. And I just made a knife out of construction steel because I thought, well, steels can't be that different. They all are steel, aren't they? So let's just make a knife out of whatever I can find. And then I realized, okay, that's complete crap. That's not even remotely usable. There is more to that. And then I started reading, and I found heat treatment always very fascinating. How you can make the same material behave completely different just by playing with fire and cold and basically time. By the time I graduated with A levels, I wanted to do basically an apprenticeship as a blacksmith. But there aren't a lot of blacksmiths out there anymore who do this full time and who aren't like construction welders. So I did a couple of internships, and I realized, okay, most of the guys have a big blacksmith sign in the front, and then you work there, and for 6 weeks you work there, and there has never been a fire lit once. Like 6 weeks, and you weld every day, TIG and MAC and everything, but you don't heat up steel, you don't pound steel. That's just like the rare order once in every blue moon. So I thought to myself, okay, if I can't do that really, what's the next thing that brings me closer to what I feel drawn to, what I'm interested in? And I thought, okay, let's check out the universities. And there was one university who did something that felt like a pyromaniac would be happy there, and I was. It wasn't easy, but it was a very long and interesting, time at the university. Now I'm
I
happy to be
mean,
in the workshop again.
So you chose.
being.
Go ahead,
Go
man.
ahead, Noah. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, so you chose metallurgy because that was pretty much the only university available course that had to do with blacksmithing or anything to that nature.
Basically, yes, that was what felt the closest to me. It's a bit ridiculous. But I was like, yeah, I can always fall back. If I fall back on that, if I ever get injured or something, I still have an office job that I can fall back on. And maybe it's not even the worst idea. I mean, making knives is pretty intense on your body, and I mean all the dust, and I don't know. Maybe it's just me being stupid, but there's a bit of strain on the body and on the tendons and the joints and everything. So it can happen pretty quickly that you lose a finger. I mean, what do you do if you lose your right thumb? What are you gonna do? And maybe it's not bad to have a plan
You'd
B.
be screwed.
You'd be screwed, really. I mean, and I, for example, cut into my right thumb last year or 1.5 years ago. I cut right through a tendon, and it's a 3-month break for you. You can't do anything. You have it's your right thumb. So sit in front of the office and try to do your web design a little bit neater with your left hand on the mouse. So I don't know. Yeah, that was basically the thought. I saw that my uncles who have been they have been roofers all their life. They kind of struggled in their higher age. So I was like, okay, let's just do university first and then see how knife making goes. And if it doesn't go well, I can always fall back on that.
I struggle now. I'm in my late 30s.
Yeah.
Yeah, it wears on you.
Yeah, it is.
Knife making's really hard on the tips of my thumbs.
Yeah, that's why you need that grinding jig.
Yeah,
Exactly. Yeah.
Exactly. No, for real. It is not. I mean, partly I think we're all doing this because we like the struggle and we like the hustle and the grind, obviously. But
Thank you.
but it has its limits. We don't want to be cripples by our 40s or 50s. I mean, we all want to have something out of life too, and that's what I start seeing more and more now. In the beginning, I was just like all in. I gotta finish this knife, no matter what the cost is. But yeah, I like waking up in the morning and not having too many things of my body hurt. So I try to be more reasonable on myself. And
That sounds
if there's
amazing. I wonder what that's like. I'm a full-time knife maker, or sorry, a full-time mechanic and a part-time knife maker. So I don't think I've ever woken up and not had something hurt. The knife
Yeah,
making for me is the easy part on my body. That's
yeah,
nothing. Most of my cuts and burns and messed up joints are all from my day job. It's the
yeah.
knife making where I get to relax. So
That must be nice. Now, for real, construction jobs are a lot worse. As I said, I did a couple of internships, and I also worked in the industries, in rolling mills and stuff, and nothing is as hard on your body as construction work, in my opinion, because there's no crane, there's no reliable process, no nothing, but it's just you and another guy, and then there's this railing that needs to go up there. And getting the crane is like a couple $100. So if you want to earn money, you got to bring that up yourself, and
mhm.
you just make it happen somehow. And that is really bad for you. So,
Yeah, I was working a construction job. Let's just say back in the day, and I was on some ladder scaffolding. So two ladders up on the side of this house that we had built, and
Oh, ladder jacks, dude. I hate ladder jacks.
and we had these ladder jacks with this aluminum scaffolding that went in between the two ladders. And me and my buddy were hauling these full sheets, so four by 8 sheets of siding up these ladders and hanging them with this ladder scaffolding while there was I don't even know how fast, but wind, real bad wind, and pouring rain beating us, like literally beating us up against the side of this house while we're hanging this sheeting onto the side of this house. And that was the day that I decided that I wanted to work indoors.
yeah, that
And
is
I will
reasonable.
never forget that day because we got a break and we went inside. And I mean, you're just soaked. You're soaked from head to toe. All your whole body is wet, and you got, I mean, these big, nail bags that are hung around your waist, and you can't move because everything's sticking to you, and you got thick clothing on, and you got these nail bags. So we just sat on these sawhorses inside. You couldn't even sit down properly. So we're just straddling these sawhorses with our heads in our hand, or yeah, heads in our hands, just trying to like breathe for like 10 minutes, and then we're back out there in it. And that was one of the worst days I've ever had working, and I will always remember that as the day that I decided I wanted to work indoors.
I think roofers have it the toughest. Roofers for sure.
Yeah,
They work
Yeah,
year round here.
yeah, I
it's
So
enjoy
they're
roofing.
I
Honestly,
was just gonna say I also enjoyed it. I worked with my uncles a couple of times. It is a rough job, and you have exactly those scenarios. It's I don't know, a March, and you start doing something, and it pours rain, and it's like almost freezing, and you're out in the rain all day. But then again, I mean, you're just out in nature a lot, and you travel a lot basically, and you get to know the city from a different perspective, and you just, I don't know, it has something to it. It's pretty rough on your body, but I I probably, yeah, would have been plan C. If knife working doesn't work out and university also doesn't work out, I'll become a roofer.
that's funny you say that because I think roofing was my plan C as well when I was going to school to become a mechanic. That was
Oh, see,
Yeah.
I hate heights.
Well, see, I don't like heights either, but I also have this weird thing in my brain where I like things that scare me. So, like, whenever I don't go to like carnivals or fairs or anything very often because I don't really like crowds. But when I do, I find like the scariest ride that goes the highest up because that terrifies me and that's fun. So that's how I operate.
So you were one of the co-developers of Apex Ultra Steel, right? It
Yep.
was you, Lauren Thomas, and Mark. How do you pronounce his last name?
Marco Guldiman.
Gu- yeah,
Guldiman. Yeah.
yeah.
He's from Switzerland. Probably a
I'm
tough
not
one for
going to
you
try to
guys.
pronounce that because I know
I
that I
wasn't.
messed it
I
up.
wasn't going to touch it.
Uh, yeah, exactly. That was the original, or that is still the founding team or the developing team. Actually, Marco and I got together in the very beginning. We're both bladesmiths. We both have an yeah, interest in metallurgy and knife steels, and we both make culinary knives and just try to push on what's possible with heat treatment and with the steels. And so we just got into a conversation, and we both wanted to have a steel that was different from what was out there at the time. And we basically decided we wanted to develop a steel for us, just make something that is a little bit harder and very pure and has a better edge retention than what's out there.
So, for the layman, like most of us, how do you go about creating a steel? Like, do you have just straight bare elements and you mix them together at the right thing and melt it? And like, how does it work? How do you make a steel?
Basically, I mean, that at that point you already invested a fair bit of money. So how you go about developing a steel is usually on the drawing board and with simulations. So that was also why we approached Larin on the way from Knife Steel Nerds, because he has a very first of all, he's a great metallurgist and he knows a lot about knife steels. And secondly, he has a huge database of comparing all the steels. And that is invaluable because now we have a resource that we can actually compare whatever we create to a whole database of other steels, and we can actually say it's better or it's not as good, or we need to change this and go up further here. And it's not just us being like proud daddies and saying, yeah, this is the best steel. It cuts through an iron nail and will still cut a tomato. I mean, this is data. This is comparable data done in a reproducible way. So that's basically the short version of how it came that we approached Larry and asked him to be part of this. And then we started analyzing the data, and we all had different ideas in the beginning where we saw the steel. You just have a gut feeling you want this steel, but want to change something, kind of. And we analyzed the different approaches, analyzed the data, and basically went with our best guess. We said 50 to 100 was a very good basis for what we wanted to create. So the matrix of Apex Ultra is based off 50 to 100, which has proven to be one of the most reliable and most used steels in carbon steels in knife making, I think. So at that point, you decide, okay, I want to try this composition that I think is our best guess. And then you go into, for example, simulations like FactSedge or different other simulations where you can calculate and model such a material. So these simulations will give you data like the transition temperature of the martensite, for example, or an expected melting temperature, an expected solidification temperature, expected phases that will form. And then you can decide based on other data if the phases that will be forming and the transition temperature that you see in this simulation, if that is beneficial and if that's what you want, or if you still need to tweak the composition. For example, decrease, I don't know, silica, manganese, or vanadium. So that you only form the phases that you actually want in your steel, because they are, the most the carbides shouldn't be too big, because otherwise they decrease toughness. They should be soluble to a certain degree at certain temperatures, so the steel is forgeable. We wanted to create a steel that is producible in a conventional method. That means we don't need powder metallurgy to get fine carbides. If we would have pushed vanadium and tungsten even higher, we could not produce the steel through conventional metallurgy, but we would have to go through the powder metallurgy route, which is a lot more expensive. And to be honest, in the moment, impossible for us, just because all of the production facilities are not available.
By powder, do you mean like crucible steels, like CPMs and like CPM S30V, stuff like that?
powder metallurgy basically just means a different way of manufacturing. So the conventional route that I'm talking about is you have a ladle or you have a furnace, you heat up steel in a vessel, and then you cast it into a block. And in the simple form, that block is then just basically forged and rolled out into the final product. That is like most carbon steels are produced. On Apex Ultra, we do a refining step in between that, which makes the structure more homogeneous and a bit more refined. That is called remelting. So we cast the steel into a block. The block is then heated up again, and basically drop by drop, the steel is molten from the top. The drops of liquid steel go through a slag and then solidify again at the bottom. And by this process, you basically get a more homogeneous and more pure steel, because now the steel block doesn't just solidify in a random way from the outside to the inside, but one drop after another is solidifying, and in the process, each drop is purified by the slag that it has to go through. Okay, so that's conventional producing. If you go through powder metallurgy, that means that you don't pour the liquid metal into a big block, but that you actually pour it into a nozzle where it's then atomized, basically, by a gas stream. So you blow very high pressure nitrogen or argon into the stream or into the nozzle where the liquid metal comes out. That just forms tiny droplets. These droplets are then, that's the powder that is collected, that is cooled down, and that is put into a container. So you have like a huge pipe that is welded shut at the bottom. You fill in all this powder, you compress it as much as you can, put on the lid, and make it tight. So you weld. You basically have a tube with powder inside that is welded shut on the ends. Then you take that powder-filled tube and put it in a furnace where it's heated up to high temperatures, like around 1000 degrees Celsius and higher, and it is compressed by an immense force. So they push in argon, and a lot of it, like a couple of thousand of bars pressure. So in the process, the steel is heated up, and basically all the voids disappear, and the whole steel just becomes one piece. It's sinters together. And that's powder metallurgy. So now you don't have drop by drop solidifying, but you have like tiny, tiny powder. So that steel is the most homogeneous. And you only use that method if you have no other choice, because your steel basically would solidify in an unfavorable way. So that's if you add too much vanadium, tungsten, carbon, whatever, your steel cannot be produced in a conventional way anymore, or the carbides that form are very detrimental. And so we just wanted to cut in between that line, because either your steel costs 30 euros per kilogram in a certain production stage or whatever, or it costs 4 times, 5 times that if you go with powder metallurgy. So it's a big step. And forging steels are all done conventionally, and with adding the remelting step and having like a small batch, we are already on the higher side of prices, just because it's the best that you can do. Basically, we try to keep all the pollutants as small as possible, just make the best steel as possible in that way. But if we would have gone to powder metallurgy, first of all, there's the problem that you cannot get production capabilities at the moment. So they're all they are booked for the next 4 years. So nobody wants to have us. And the other problem is just the pure cost. That would be 4 times of the cost that we have right now.
I really appreciate the explanation that you gave of the two different types there, and I really appreciate the layman's terms that you were able to use, so that most people should be able to understand that, because I'm sure it's a lot more complicated than that. I know a lot of car parts are actually manufactured in that the powder metallurgy way. A lot of like uh, connecting rods, things like that, are
Yeah,
made using
things
that
that are
process.
usually pretty tough, or that have a lot of strain on them, or like valve caps and things, something like that. Just weird parts that would otherwise break first. It's like the last resort that you have as a metallurgist. If it's not possible to produce it in another way, or you want to get the quality better, just let's go. Powder metallurgy. It also has some drawbacks, though. For example, the oxygen contents are usually a little bit higher, but then that's
Interesting.
too deep.
Okay. All right.
But
Well, just
basically,
quickly,
yeah.
go ahead.
Ahead.
Oh,
Yeah,
I was just going to ask the place out of Sweden that does the very very intricate patterns with stainless steels.
Damas steel.
Damas steel.
Damas steel. Thank you.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought I heard that they use powder metallurgy for creating their steels. Do you know if that's correct?
Yes, I think according to their homepage, they use powder metallurgy. Yes, it's correct.
Interesting. Okay, so yeah, that
They're also not cheap.
I was gonna say, and then that
They're
might
like
kind of
600 euros per
explain
kilogram.
the cost. I mean, you get an amazing product,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
man, you gotta really want it.
You gotta really want it. I mean, the price of the material is um, already that of some other knives out there. So yeah,
Exactly. Yeah. Hmm.
it's pretty intense. So as I was just explaining how you develop a steel, we didn't get far. So basically, we were at the simulation stage. Now we simulate which contents we want to have, having already in mind the production flow that we are aiming for, and all of that in the background. So we simulated the alloy until we were happy, until we thought, okay, this is a pretty good guess. And then you go into the real world and you make a small production batch, or you make a small laboratory batch that is like 40 pounds of steel. So it's a small vacuum induction furnace. So you can imagine that thing like a big pressure cooker having an induction melter inside. So it's basically just a metal vessel that can be put under pressure or put under vacuum. And they can, just purge it with argon. It's very enclosed. Um, you have very good control over the atmosphere in there, because as soon as you heat up the steel, as we all know, it starts to burn. It starts to form scale in the solid state, and if you heat it to a liquid, obviously it's also going to burn. So that's a problem. That's why you need a very specific vessel. You cannot just, I can melt steel on my induction forge in the shop, and I can throw in stuff there, but it's not scientific. I don't have all the equipment that I need in the shop, although I already have a lot. But I'm still more comfortable at a university facility, because we're talking about, in this stage, you throw in a couple of €1,000 for every melt that you do, just for the 40 pounds. So you already want to have an educated guess before you do that. We did that, and we got pretty lucky on the. We didn't have to iterate too much. The first batch was fantastic. So basically, from the university, I got a huge block of steel, which I then transported back to the forge, cut into smaller pieces, heated up again, just forged out and hot rolled as we would imagine that the production process would look like. And then we made specimens of that. So, just like tiny plates, and put those through all the different heat treatments that we thought were reasonable for that kind of steel. And then we did, for each of those heat treatments, hardness testing, toughness testing, and we also did katra testing, so edge retention testing. And that's the first time when you can actually say, okay, how was the steel behaving during forging? Is it realistic that this is a forging steel? How does it grind? Those are, the data that I can get in the workshop. And then after that, the analysis that Laren did with the toughness testing and all that gave us an indicator of where we are. and that was the first time that we were really happy because we were able to basically do what we wanted to, and we could outperform all of the other low alloy steels in terms of edge retention, and we could produce a steel that is able to achieve very high hardnesses. And I think a lot of people don't really understand why we wanted such high hardnesses up to 60 HRC. But the term that we are more looking for is edge stability. So if we do very low angles on the edge, it becomes increasingly more important that your steel is hard, because your steel can either break in the front, your edge can either chip basically, or it can bend. And the thinner the angle, or the lower the angle gets, the more it starts to bend. So if you do like a, I don't know, 50 HRC knife and you will sharpen it to 12 degrees per side, your first cut, it's just going to roll the edge. So if you want to have fine angles, you want to have fine angles for cutting, for razors, for kitchen knives. You need a steel that's actually able to hold that edge. If you can do that, the second thing is you want to have it as tough as possible, tough enough so that you don't get problems with chipping. So hardness is important for basically your edge angle, for your edge stability. Toughness is important so you don't break your steel, so you don't get chipping on the edge. And edge retention basically is what happens if you saw through something. So it's like abrasion, basically. If you cut through sandpaper, the steel is going to abrade and it's going to get dull. So material is removed without bending or breaking, just by abrasion. So those are the three factors that we were looking for, and those are just, the scientific equivalents that you can test, that guide you, or that can give you an indicator for a real world application. So then you can compare. Okay, I know a steel that has 66 HRC and has similar toughness, maybe, but it doesn't have the edge retention. Then you can find the balance between the properties that you're looking for, and you can get benchmark for what heat treatment you think is suited best for this application.
So going
Yep.
back, you essentially nailed this on the first try after your first real world test.
It was the first melt. Yes, we nailed it on the first melt. We did a lot of research before. It was 1.5 years of research before we actually even
Jeez.
mold any. Before we did the first Vim melt. But yes, it was the first Vim melt, and we did, I don't know, 50 different specimens on heat treating, and yeah.
That's
So
awesome. So it's
that
That is awesome.
year and a half well spent, then I would say.
yes, yeah, we consider that
Awesome.
too. And then the fun begins, because then up until then everything was pretty, reasonable with prices. But if you want to have something produced, metallurgy is something that doesn't scale down easily. So
Yeah,
you
I
need
would
to buy
imagine.
big. And all all the companies don't really want you in the beginning. So they're all like, you're too small, you're not interesting. Come with 500,000 again and we'll talk.
Oh,
So it was a long journey until we found companies to work with, that we can actually produce the way and process the steel in the way that we envisioned, with the process route that we envisioned. And yeah, the first batch was still a huge adventure, because it's not like you buy the finished steel. All these companies say, okay, this steel has never been produced before, we haven't done it before, we'll do what you say, but if it goes bad, it's not our problem. It's your problem. So
yeah.
it's basically like somebody gives you a mystery piece of steel and asks you to heat treat it. You're gonna be like, yeah, okay, what do you want me to heat treat it? I'll do it, but I can't guarantee for anything. It's your piece. So I understand the companies. For them, it's our research, and they just want to earn their money. But it wasn't a very fun situation as a small tacksmith, if you have to produce the steel and finance all of that. however, we did, probably underestimating the risk, but the production risk. Yeah, we were called crazy a couple of times by the companies, but they were right. The risk was actually pretty big, and we lost half of the first batch actually. So we already went 2 of the 3 production steps. So the steel was molten and cast. It was remolten, and in the last production step at the last company, I was there when it happened. We did the hot rolling. So during hot rolling, you still have a block that is fairly. It's like woods. I don't know if anybody's familiar with making woods, but when you do the first couple of forging steps, you got to be careful. You got to, soak the steel for a little bit. They call it roasting. So, get the carbon to diffuse a little bit so you don't have any high spots in carbon that melt earlier. And you want to be very, very careful. Well, our steel is not too far away from where the woods is. So, in the casting structure, it's still very tricky to forge. And we actually just missed the temperature by 50 degrees Celsius. And this first block of steel just crumbled in front of my eyes on the first contact with the rolling mill. So you can imagine just now driving your mid-size new car into a tree. That's basically what happened financially on that day. It was a big drawback, but luckily we had 2 blocks on the way. So our melt consisted of 2 blocks, and we called it a day. We had the other block just cool down to room temperature again, reassembled our forces, and well, as the block was already there, we had to do something with it. So again, we cut off pieces from the material that we had. We analyzed it. We did microscopy testing. I cut off a couple of pieces and I just heated it up in the forge to different forging temperatures. And I have a rolling mill in my workshop. So I just did rolling simulations. Just did a couple of days just heating steel to different temperatures, and I hot rolled the steel until I was comfortable with the temperature. And always, just going back with Lerin and with Marco, asking or discussing what should we do? But the second block was already there. We couldn't do anything without it anyway, so we needed to decide on the temperature. If we go too low, it will form cracks on the surface. If you go too high, it crumbled like it did on the first run. So that was another nerve-wracking day, but the second block then, therefore, we were lucky, or we did a good guess again, some good guesswork, and it all worked out nicely. So then we could follow through with the rest of the process. It didn't affect the product quality in any way. It was just the first block. If you get basically what happened was that if the temperature is a little bit too high and your carbon concentration on the grain boundaries is too high, you can have like a tiny film of metal that becomes liquid. And we underestimated basically this effect. We thought the carbon would be more homogeneous at that point in time, and that was an expensive mistake.
Yeah,
I would have cried.
sounds like it. So you essentially took the failed block and then did testing to determine what the proper temperature was. Is that what I basically heard?
No, we actually cut off a piece of the good block too. And we compared both of those. So our yield on the first batch was pretty disappointing. You lose a lot of material in the process always, because in every stage, at the rolling mill, for example, you have like 6-meter increments or whatever, and you always cut off 30 centimeters. You just always cut off 1 foot or something, so that you don't have any problems. Just do it over and over again through the process. So it's normal to lose like 30-40% of your batch. From the beginning to the end. That's you have to expect that anyways. But then if you lose half of your batch along the way, then
On top of
it's
that,
not too
yeah.
much. There's not too much left, and then you just
Uh,
cut off a few chunks for testing of the last block. So yeah, the first batch was a lot smaller than anticipated, and actually. When we talked about when we should do this podcast, I think it was spot on because tomorrow at 11 a.m. We will have the hot rolling stage once again. That was the crucial moment of the first batch where we failed the first block. So tomorrow at 11 a.m. I'm going to be at the rolling mill again, watching the spectacle and being slightly nervous. I am very confident that everything will go as planned, as now we have a recipe that we are following. We have one recipe that worked the first time, and it should work again. But you never know what the companies do exactly. And as I said, all the process fluctuations, they can add up. But I think, and what from everything that I've seen, I can only expect a product that is even better than the first batch. So
so this is just the second batch that you're going to be rolling out tomorrow?
Yes, second batch. Things are
Wow.
moving very, very slow with these companies. So if you order steel today, you will get steel in 9 to 10 months at the moment. So as you
Jeez.
can imagine, with the high risk anyways, we couldn't order a second batch until we had confirmation that the first batch would work out. So basically we
Naturally.
ordered right after we knew that the steel was okay. But I think the first batch came out in June, July. So now it's like the production time afterwards. So it was as fast as we can. Now we already put in the third order for the batch. So this time the iterations are going to be faster. But yeah, it's not like Amazon Prime. You can't order today and get it 2 days later.
Well, you can't even do that anymore with Amazon Prime. Jeez. Wow, that is extremely fascinating. So, just real quick, if any of our listeners are interested in getting their hands on some Apex Ultra, what's that going to look like for them here in the States?
Let me very quickly check. So in the US, we have Pop's Knife Supply, who has already been a retail partner of Apex Ultra on the first batch. They will definitely be importing again on the second batch, and in Canada we have Knife Maker Direct, who will also definitely gonna get steel. There is a couple of more retailers who have approached us, but learning from the first batch, as you probably can understand, I don't want to make any promises until we have the steel in our hands. Like the people who bought from us the first time, they didn't get as much as they ordered in the first batch, so they are going to be the first ones whom we're going to deliver to from the second batch. So those two are definitely going to be like top priority, and then after that we're going to go basically first come first serve with all the orders, how they came in. Another thing that is tricky for us is we cannot really plan the costs because we only know the cost, the final cost. Like we know plus minus 10%, but as our margin on all of this is very narrow, we cannot set the prices until the steel is really in our warehouse. So, we'll get the steel here and then we'll calculate the cost and offer it to the retail partners and then ship it to them. But we just
Right.
want to, we want to keep the cost as low as possible because we want to have people using it and being excited about it.
Yeah, you just don't want to promise a price and then have something happen in the production process and then you're like, shit,
Yep.
I am not making any money. So
Exactly.
it
And
makes
with the
sense.
energy prices, that's what all the companies do to us. So basically, they say like, yeah, it's going to be like this plus minus energy prices. The energy price is going to depend on the price of the specific day that we are going to hot roll your steel. And we cannot promise a yield. And I mean, a yield is probably not something people think about, but if you have like 60% yield in the best case scenario, it doesn't matter what the first company charges per kilogram. I mean, you're only going to get, they're going to charge you the 100%, but you only get 60% of that steel in the end. So it all just adds up.
Wow, that is intense. Ryan, let's take this pause to throw in another ad from another one of our sponsors
All right.
and talk about Phoenix a little bit, maybe.
And then after that, I have to ask you what your cat's names are, because I've been watching them have like their own little like drama going on behind you.
They've been having a battle. I've noticed
Yeah.
that. Yes.
They're very active.
Hustle and Grind is sponsored by PhoenixAbrasives.com, your one-stop abrasive shop. They stock all the abrasive belts you need in all sizes. They also offer knife-making kits, which have all the goods you need in one kit, as well as hand sanding and buffing materials. Go to PhoenixAbrasives.com and use the code HUSTLE10 for 10% off your order.
That's right, guys. PhoenixAbrasives.com. Go to the website, click shop in the upper right-hand corner, and they have different areas. They have one specifically for knife makers, and you can get all different kinds of belts, abrasives, buffing material. I just ordered from them, and they have an extraordinary variety of different types of ceramic belts in particular. So I think I went through and I tried to order every single type of ceramic belts that they have, and I'm going to try them out, and I'm going to tell you guys which one is my favorite. But they have a large variety, and then of course they have those incinerator belts, which are phenomenal. They're priced to match, but they do last and they are great. But I'm going to try out some of the other abrasives that they have and see what I think of them, just because there's such a large variety. So, anyways, check out PhoenixAbrasives.com.
What kind of abrasives do you recommend, Tobias?
I am happy with VSM belts. I'm very happy with them.
That's what I run too.
Yeah, I like them. One thing that I want to say, if we're talking about grinding belts, it depends so much on how you grind, I think. So I stopped recommending belts really to anyone because it depends on how much pressure you run on your belt and what speeds you run. So I feel like the common thing in the industry is running pretty fast with relatively low pressure, so you don't overheat the steel. And I run the complete opposite. So I have like even my belt grinders are specifically built for low RPM, high torque, because I imagine it more like milling, like take deep cuts with each grain of the belt. So I put a lot of pressure on there and run the belts rather low and run water cooling.
Do you have a water cooled platen?
No, I have spray cooling. So
spray cooling. Okay,
spray cooling.
I've used that as well.
Big mess.
Oh yeah, always.
Yeah, makes
my shop's a big mess anyways, so who cares?
Yeah, doesn't matter.
But that's interesting that you say that, because I've noticed that with different belts, there are some belts that seem like they cut better at higher speeds, and then I have some other belts that I've gotten recently that seem like they cut better at low speeds, even though most people say that ceramic is intended to be run at a higher speed because you get more cutting life out of it that way. But I've got some other ceramics that seem to really hog material off a lot better when they're run at a lower speed.
Yeah, it's the same experience. And I have a surface grinder built, like transformed into a belt thing instead of the stone. And I realized that the belts there, they dull in a completely different fashion than when I use them on the 2x72 grinder. So on the surface grinder, usually you can see like there's 99% of the grit is still on there. It's just the tips that start to glaze. They just round over, and then it doesn't cut anymore. But if you take the same belt and do contour grinding on one knife and then put it on a 2x72 again, it's like a new belt. So it's fascinating. Just pay attention to how your belts run out, because very few of them actually run out of grit in my experience. Most of them dull by some way. Either they clog or they glaze, or yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because one of our previous guests, Noah Vachon, he's a Canadian knife maker. Awesome guy. I run Trizac belts, like the Gator belts, and he had told me that you can take a diamond stone
Yep.
and re-grit them.
Yep.
And I bought a diamond stone, and it works like a dream.
Yeah, totally. For anything, like I use the VSM agglomerate belts. I don't know what they're called, but it's same idea as the Gator Grit, just a lot cheaper, and probably not. I still like I like the Gator Grit too, but anywhere where you have small grids agglomerated into bigger grids, diamonds are awesome. And if you want to get a quick belt finish on Apex Ultra, then you'll need the diamond stone right next to you as you grind after heat treatment. So basically, I do a couple of strokes and then just redress the belt. So I don't usually do the redressing with diamonds on the lower grit ceramic belt. So on 60 and 120 grit, I don't do that. Only in rare occasions if I have glazing. But on the finishing grids, so all these aluminum oxide agglomerate belts, whatever the name are, just like the Gator Grit, it's perfect. And you can see, as soon as your finish on the knife becomes bright, if it becomes shiny, then basically your belts are dull. Because even a 400 grit or 600 grit belt, if it's sharp, you get a matte finish on the blade.
Yeah, it
So
should still bite. Yeah.
yeah, I don't need to look at the belts of my students. I look at the knife usually. And my experience is also, if you have more pressure, the belt is going to cut longer. Obviously, because your formation of a chip basically happens easier.
Interesting. I
Awesome.
never would have thought about it that way.
We've talked about like different makers' belt progressions and how they use their belts a lot on this show, because like I grind a different way than Noah grinds, and all of our guests we found grind differently.
Yeah.
You're actually the only one that grinds similar to how I grind, which makes me feel good. So
Yeah.
thank you for that.
Yeah, I got 60 and 120 ceramic VSM. And then I do the compound 240 and 600, the compound grid aluminum oxide surface finishing belts, also from VSM.
I start at 36 and I jump to 120 Trizact all the way up to like whatever the highest one they offer is. I think and Gator is like 600.
Yeah.
And then I switch to Scotch Brights.
So you only have 3 grids basically.
Pretty much.
36, 60, and 600. Yeah, makes sense.
And low and slow. The only one I run fast is the 36 ceramic.
Mm-hmm.
Everything else is like 30% or below.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Really, that low?
Mm-hmm. Just low and slow. That's
Low and
and
slow.
all that micarta I have, you have to grind it like that anyways, because it'll burn. So low and slow.
Titanium
nice.
is also very interesting to grind. It's also if you can actually feel it. Like if you do the low and slow technique, you form chips and it feels like filing. It's like it actually feels like filing. There's no sparks.
Huh.
And if you go faster, then you go. You can feel that the teeth or the individual grit, they don't get below the surface anymore, but they only get into the hardened surface area. So it almost feels like skating over the surface, and you throw sparks, and it's a spectacle. But if you go very slow, you can feel how it's basically chewing into the soft material behind the hardened surface. I don't know if it's a common thing, but if you've the where I thought of it the first time is if you machine like on a milling machine or on a turn, how do you call it? Yeah, spinny thing.
A lathe.
A lathe, thanks.
Yeah.
Or on a lathe, if you do stainless steel, actually, if you take one cut, the neighboring area that hasn't been cut away, but it has been it has been affected by the stress that has been put into the material by the cutter, that will get a lot harder than the material behind it. So actually, the feeds and speeds for a material like that is, you always have to cut behind the hardened area. You always have to cut deep enough so you cut away into the soft material and cut the the hardened area away. And I don't know, that thought model just has helped me a lot with grinding too, forming a chip and getting through this area.
Interesting.
This is
I've
Whatever
never worked
works.
with I've never worked with titanium before. What do you use titanium for?
I made a whole handle out of it, like a full
Oh, geez.
one-piece titanium handle. Yeah, it was not fun. It
I've never
was,
used it, but the sparks look cool
yeah,
because they're
they do.
white. Yeah.
All right. Well, we're at an hour 35 here, so we should probably shut this down soon. But I just had to ask you about one more thing, and then we can start to close out here. On your Instagram, I saw that you had done a laminate of both copper and stainless together into a knife. And you said that someone had inspired you to do this. So obviously, I'm sure you want to give them credit. What sort of bond do you have with that? Because I know that the bond between stainless and carbon, if you're doing a standard stainless amide, I mean, that's obviously not the same bond that you're getting with carbon to carbon. But then you're adding in that extra element. What was that like doing that lamination?
It was frustrating. It was really frustrating the first couple of times I messed it up. Um, but in the end, like once you get everything right, let's put it that way, and the diffusion happens, it's a pretty good bond. I mean, copper is always going to be softer than the steel, but you don't have it in the edge. And I think it's not technically making much sense, that combination, but it's aesthetically very pleasing, and it's just
Oh,
I
it's
like a
striking.
challenge.
It's very striking.
I like a challenge. So since then, I've also done like a Damascus core and then copper in between and stainless cladding. It just looks really cool. But it's all of the things. They're always solid state diffusion bonding. So in the sciencey world, this would be called an LMC, a laminated metal composite. And I always think all of the materials that we make, all the Damascus and nickel Damascus and kumai and gomai, all that, it's all in LMC. It's all solid state diffusion bonding. So we never melt anything. It's just clean surfaces, put it together, make sure no oxygen gets in there, heat it up, and deform it a little bit. I mean, that's the whole chapter. Everything is always the same. Just the process parameters vary, and the degree of complexity of getting these things clean and together and getting no oxygen in there, that varies. I mean, with Damascus, with carbon steel, with simple steels, it's pretty easy after a while. um, so it's very forgiving compared to stainless Damascus, for example. And then you put in copper, and then it's like the worst of stainless and the worst of kumai, and then you just put those two things together, and your process window always becomes smaller. So the range of temperatures that you can work in becomes smaller, and the range of time that you can work in becomes smaller, and how much you can deform it and how much you have to deform it. All the windows, they become smaller and smaller, and you just have to find the gap. You just what will work, what's not too high and not too low, and what's not too fast and not too slow.
the
So
the temperature was really the thing that came to my mind because you're trying to find a temperature to where copper wants to be, but at the same time stainless. That must have been tough to try and find that proper temperature.
yeah, it's tricky, especially in the beginning. It wants to delaminate so bad because you are at a temperature that is pretty low for stainless. The stainless is still pretty strong. And in the beginning, you don't have a good bond because there's no diffusion happened yet, no friction welding or nothing. So the copper is very soft. There's hardly any bound to the stainless steel, and the stainless steel is pretty hard. So in that stage, you just can't make many mistakes. You need very controlled deformation, and any stresses, compression force is always good during solid state diffusion bonding, but any stresses like peeling is always bad. So just be careful with that. Just try to get as much pressure on it. That's also why it's so much easier forge welding on a press, on a hydraulic press. Especially if you have dies that are larger than the billet, it's just like heating up the steel, going in there and squeezing it. There's only compression forces. There's no area that really wants to go apart. But if you do a hand hammer, your hammer is only like 10%, or your impact surface of the hammer is only like 10% of the billet size. So, 10% are pushed together, and the rest of the billet is either not pushed together or even torn apart at that moment. That's why you have to go light and fast in the beginning, so you just don't get too much stress. Don't have it delaminate. So that's actually why for hobbyists it's so much harder to make Damascus, because they usually don't have equipment that allows them to compress the whole thing. And then with the hand hammer, it's very tricky.
Well, and for me, my press is very small. My dies are, like you were saying with the hand hammer, probably 10% the size of a billet that you would need. So anytime you squeeze that, it's trying to pull the rest of it apart.
Yeah.
So that would be very difficult to create something like that on a smaller press.
How much force does it have?
12 tons.
12 tons. That's enough. Just get bigger dies for setting the weld. Just flat dies. Just put some flat iron on there just for setting the weld. Helps a lot. 12 tons is enough for a smaller billet, I think.
Right. Well, maybe I'll give it a try.
Nice.
I haven't ventured into the kumai before. I've seen a lot of guys do some amazing stuff with it, and I constantly get people asking me, "When are you going to do the kumai? When are you going to do it?" And it's like, I don't know. I don't really want to. It's kind of scary, and I'll get there maybe.
Yeah. Be careful. If you overheat it, it's going to be liquid copper shooting out of the back.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm worried about.
So get your face.
That's what I'm worried about.
It's a good idea.
I just saw that the stainless and the copper was so striking. It was beautiful. So I had to ask you about that. So that's really cool to hear about. So thank you. I appreciate that. Ryan, do we have anything else we want to touch on?
Yes, we do. We have to tell the whole world to go buy tickets to Maximus Knives raffle. $15 a spot or 40 for 3. There's over 40 prizes. We're talking chef knives, petty knives, Ameribraid's throwing in stuff. Phoenix Abrasives is throwing in knife kit belts. This, I don't know all the items. There's way too many. There's literally 40 or more, and I'm pretty sure some more are still trickling in. So he's gonna run this raffle till March 1st, and then do a huge drawing. So
I don't know how I forgot about this. I was really distracted with this amazing conversation we've been having about steel, and I was really getting into that. So I apologize, but let me tell you how freaking excited I am for this. Okay, guys. So let's just back up a minute here. So a while ago, Pickle had a fundraiser that he ran for his sister-in-law, and she had cancer, and you people raised 20 grand for that family. And I want to tell you all how freaking proud I am of all of you people who donated, everyone who donated items. That was freaking awesome. So awesome. We're going to do it again, guys. Okay. So Neil from Maximus Knives, we talked about it before. He's gone full time. Dude did not intend to go full time. All right. So you can go check out his story. You can go check out his reels that he's posted about it. I'm not going to speak for the guy, but it's time to help our boy out. Okay. This is what we do. This is a family. This is a community. We love each other and we support each other. And I can't tell you how excited I am to see so many people stepping up to the plate and helping this guy out. So we have, like Ryan was saying, just a ton of different people that are putting in some amazing prizes, some amazing companies, Ameribraid. So there's some great prizes for makers, for anyone. There's going to be some cool chef knives and some other, what was it? There was some like super cool rings that were being donated to this. I mean, all kinds of stuff. So,
all right. So
Maximus
I'm going to let
Knives on Instagram.
I'm going to let our listeners choose for me, because I've got 2 knives and I'm torn on which one I'm going to donate. So hold on. I'll go grab the other one.
Okay, so if you're listening to the audio only version of this podcast, you have no idea what he's about to do. So go on YouTube, Hustle and Grind podcast on YouTube, and you'll be able to see what the hell he's doing here. So, anyways, go to Maximus Knives on Instagram, and you can see his. He's got a story highlight. So pinned at the top of his page, go to the story highlight. He's got all of his payment info there where you can buy tickets. It's $15 a spot, or I think it's $40 for 3 spots. So go buy some tickets. I'm sure he'll be posting up some more information about all the prizes. Some of them are going to be maker specific because I don't think any random person on the street is going to need 3 bars of Baker Forge and Tool steel. But anyways, I don't know exactly how he's going to work that out, but he'll figure it out. It'll be great.
I imagine he'll split them up. That's $1,000 worth of steel. I mean, each one of Baker's bars are
do a maker draw and then a regular person draw, something along those lines.
All right, so I got this big diamond grind raindrop pattern. So I got that one. And then this one is a little petty knife of the Baker Forge Shichimai. Mm-hmm. And it's not quite there. I got to go back a little bit right there, but whatever.
That's fine. We can't really see it on the camera anyways.
Ooh, pretty. Can you see it? Yep. So I can't decide. I don't know.
Well, I know that you've posted both of those on your Instagram already. So if people go to your Instagram, they can see what you're talking about and they can shoot you a DM and tell you which one you should do. I'm going to tell you right now, I personally think you should do the diamond grind one. Tobias, what do you think?
Same thought here. Looks amazing.
All right.
The reason I say that is because if that's going to somebody who's going to use it to cook at home, a big, sweet diamond grind Damascus chef knife is going to be a little more eye-catching, a little more of a pride point when people come over and be like, oh yeah, I'm just chopping these vegetables with this beautiful diamond grind chef knife.
Yeah. It's a funny thing because I think the small knives are so underrated in our community. Everybody buys big knives, but at home, probably using 30, 40, 50% of the time a pretty small sized knife. And after all, I mean, if it's not how often I use a knife, I don't know what it is that makes a knife valuable. And I'm actually a pretty big fan of a small petty. A good petty is a very, very useful knife in just everyday life, breakfast, whatever.
It's amazing how often you hear that because you're absolutely right. Everyone goes for the big chef knives, and some people make 10-inch knives that they're expecting to be used as an everyday chef knife. I personally don't make anything bigger than an 8-inch chef, but the majority of people that I talk to, they're reaching for a 6-inch, something smaller like that, for the majority of the tasks that they're doing in their kitchen.
Yeah, that diamond grind.
I'm making knives for home cooks. I don't know what professional chefs are using all the time.
That
one's 9.5.
It really depends on whom you're selling to. I think. I think like the home enthusiasts, they have giant knives very often, and the average Joe is probably reaching for the smaller stuff. But professional chefs also like some absurd orders.
They're very specific.
Half sword, yeah. But whatever works for them, I think it's fun to listen to the different ways of working and how people use their knives.
For sure.
Whatever works for them. I mean, nothing is wrong.
Well, yeah,
really.
and I mean, I've learned so much from my customers. You know, I know a lot of people try and shy away from doing custom orders, and I respect that. Like, don't get me wrong, that would be fantastic to just make what you want, put it up, sell it. But I've learned a ton from my customers, whether it's talking about hand size or how they use their knives or what they prefer. And I've ended up creating things that I wouldn't have made otherwise. And I've learned a lot from it. So
yeah. And sometimes you're like, nah, that's not for me. I'm not going to make that again. And another time you're like, Well, look at that. I didn't think that would turn out nicely. And it did.
Sometimes it's
Same-
like, oh,
yeah,
I'm glad you
same
like
experience.
it, but I'm just gonna forget that happened. But
You're
yeah,
not gonna
other
post
times
that on
it's good.
Instagram. No, I'm not gonna post that. Sorry. Yeah, I know those ones
But-
too.
All right,
Awesome.
guys. Well, this has been a great show. Tobias, thank you so much for
Thank you,
joining
guys.
us. I think this is I love these episodes where we get to talk to somebody that's super knowledgeable in a specific field and we really get to pick their brain and get a lot of information out of it. I personally feel like I've learned from this, and I hope the listeners have too. And
I have.
And yeah,
Awesome.
it's been an absolute thrill to have you. And honestly, if you don't mind, we'd love to have you on again. I feel like there's some stuff that we could have delved deeper into if we had more time. So
Absolutely.
I'm very open to that, and I'm very interested in that grinding jig.
Yeah, definitely.
The thumb, you could call it the Tobias thumb saver.
The some support.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of interest about that. Anybody who has seen it and realized what it is has been curious about it. So I'm pretty sure we'll see more of that. And obviously, I'd be happy to come back anytime. It's been very fun. And yeah, just let me know when, and we'll make time.
Oh, before I hit the outro music, what are your cats' names?
They're Runa, Heimdall, and Alma. So they're just in their teens and they're having a very active time at the moment. They also we cover everything at the moment, so the couch is covered in blankets because they make a mess and they destroy everything at the moment.
I have a puppy right now, and he is a nightmare.
Yeah, it's like yesterday we bought them some grass, just so they can eat the grass. It's good for their digestion. And they just decided to dig out all of the soil and spread it throughout the floor. So, it's coming in the morning, Sunday morning, your whole living room is full of soil. Just earth everywhere. Like, yeah, great. Let's make coffee. Yeah. But yeah, they're cute.
On that note, it was a good one.
Thank you, guys.
everybody have a good week. See you next time.
Goodbye.